I've always believed that life is a tapestry woven with small, everyday gestures. It's in these subtle acts of kindness that our true character shines through. Today, on what should have been a joyous 40th anniversary, I was determined to perform a gesture of profound love for my son, the only child Jim and I were blessed with. 40 years ago, I stood by Jim's side at the altar, filled with hope and a love so pure it felt like a fairy tale. Even now, with him gone, that day remains the most perfect day of my life. In the quiet emptiness of our home, I wanted his memory to be more than a memory. I wanted it to be a living, breathing testament to the values we held dear, to the life we built for our son. Mark has always been a man of grand ambition. He built his career in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of tech, a place where success is measured in stock options and quarterly reports, and where the word legacy is just another buzzword for a tax-deductible foundation. He was never a man given to sentiment, but I foolishly believed that today, of all days, the significance of what I was about to do would touch him. I had spent the entire morning meticulously preparing for this dinner. It was to be an intimate gathering, just the three of us, a quiet tribute to Jim. I had baked Jim's favorite apple pie, a recipe he jokingly called his retirement plan because he loved it so much. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled the air, a scent that for me was synonymous with comfort and home. The table was set with Jim's finest china, the crystal glasses we had received as a wedding gift, and a bottle of the same vintage wine we had toasted with on our honeymoon. Every detail was a whisper of our shared history, a loving tribute to a man who had dedicated his life to his family. An hour before they were to arrive, I went to the old, solid oak writing desk in Jim's study. Its drawers were filled with a lifetime of memories, tax documents, old photos, and the occasional love note from me to him. From a hidden compartment, I retrieved a small, unassuming envelope. It was heavy with the weight of my past and the promise of my son's future. Inside were the documents for a gift that would change Mark's life forever, a testament to his father's unwavering belief in him. I was transferring a significant portion of the business shares Jim had carefully nurtured over his lifetime. It wasn't just a financial gesture. It was a symbol of my unconditional trust, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. The moment the front door swung open, the air of quiet reverence I had so carefully cultivated evaporated. Mark and his wife Lisa strode in with a cold indifference, their presence a stark contrast to the warmth of the room. It wasn't the warmth of a loving son and his wife coming home. It was the detached air of two people showing up for a mandatory social engagement. Lisa's first words were a jab that hit me right in the heart. "Oh, Mary, you could have at least hired a caterer. This smell, it's so heavy, like something out of a retirement community." She said it with a curl of her lip, as if the scent of homemade food was a personal insult. My heart, which had been so full of love, ached with a sudden sharp pain. But I was not going to let her ruin this day. I chose to see her words as a reflection of her own emptiness, not a judgment of my life. We sat down to dinner, and I tried to steer the conversation toward happy memories of Jim, of our life together. I spoke of the sacrifices he made, the late nights he spent building his company from the ground up, the passion he had for his work and his family. I finished my toast by holding up the envelope, my hand trembling slightly with emotion. "I wanted to give you this, Mark. It's a part of your father's legacy, a symbol of our love and our belief in you." Mark took the envelope from my hand with a dismissive flick of his wrist. He didn't even bother to look me in the eye. He simply tossed it on the table as if it were a piece of junk mail. My hope, my carefully constructed tribute, was met with a cold, condescending silence. Then he spoke, and each word was a hammer blow to my heart. "You know, Mom, that's sweet," he began, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. "But let's be honest, you and Dad, you didn't really achieve anything, did you? Not in the modern sense. You built a little business, you lived a simple life. It was quaint. But success? Success is being on the cover of Forbes. It's having a private jet. It's about making your name on a global stage. You just lived. It's a nice story, I suppose, but it's not an achievement." His words hit me like a physical blow. The pie I had baked with so much love felt like ashes in my mouth. The wine, a symbol of our love, now tasted like bile. I felt the familiar sting of tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I looked at them both and felt a stillness inside me that was more dangerous than any storm. "You know," I said, my voice as steady as a rock, "you're right. I did just live. But I also have a few things I'd like to give you, things I've been holding on to for a while." Their eyes, a moment ago so full of dismissive arrogance, now sharpened with a renewed interest. They were expecting more money, more things to fill their gaping, empty lives, that I had something else entirely in mind. And now, as I reflect on that moment, I understand with a chilling clarity that the biggest mistakes are not in what we do, but in the people we choose to trust. And the biggest lessons are not in what we say, but in what we don't. And I promise you, this lesson will be a masterpiece. To see what happens next, you need to stay right here because you absolutely do not want to miss a single shocking detail of this story. You've seen a mother's heart broken. Now you'll see a woman's soul forged in steel. What happens when a woman who supposedly achieved nothing decides to give her son everything he owns? You'll have to keep watching to find out.
The air in the dining room, once heavy with the comforting scent of baked apples, had turned frigid, thick with a cold, predatory silence. Mark and Lisa, a perfect pair of vultures dressed in designer clothes, leaned forward in their chairs. Their masks of polite indifference had slipped, revealing a raw, naked greed in their eyes. It was the same look a hawk gives a helpless field mouse before its final, fatal dive. My son's casual dismissal of my life's work as not an achievement had been a personal insult, a judgment that cut far deeper than any financial slight. But I wasn't just some quaint old lady with an outdated sense of success. I was the woman who had helped build a life from nothing, who had nurtured a family and a home with every ounce of my being. And now, in the face of their casual cruelty, a calm, chilling fury settled within me. "So," Mark's voice broke the silence, his tone dripping with forced joviality, "don't keep us in suspense, Mom. What other little trinkets do you have for us?" The words were meant to sound light, a playful job, but I heard the desperate undertone of a man who saw dollar signs where I saw memories. Lisa nodded eagerly, her eyes darting around the room as if trying to calculate the value of every antique and heirloom. They saw this as a transaction, not a family gathering, a grotesque theatrical play where I, the simpleton, was supposed to hand over my life's possessions. It was a vile and bitter irony, and a cruel, knowing smile touched my lips. I stood up slowly, deliberately. Every movement was a performance, a silent act of defiance. I walked to the mahogany sideboard, a piece of furniture Jim and I had bought on our very first road trip, and picked up a polished wooden box. It was no bigger than a paperback book, but its weight felt substantial in my hands. The box was a gift from my late husband, made by his own hands in his workshop for our 10th anniversary. Inside, I kept our most precious memories: a dried rose from our first date, a small sea glass heart we found on a beach in Florida, and a single, well-worn key. "Remember this?" I asked, holding up the box for them to see. Mark squinted, and Lisa just stared blankly, a look of profound ignorance on her face. Of course they didn't remember.
They barely remembered last week's lunch, let alone the small, meaningful gestures that had built our life. My heart, which had been aching so profoundly just moments ago, hardened a little more. It's the key to the workshop. Jim's workshop. Mark let out a cynical laugh, a sound that grated on my ears. Mom, seriously? What does Dad's old workshop have to do with anything? We're not building birdhouses. My heart, which had been hurting so much, hardened a little more. No, I retorted, throwing his earlier words back at him with a chilling accuracy. You're not building anything. You're just living. I saw his face flush with a mix of shame and anger. It was a fleeting victory, but a victory nonetheless. He had always been so good at talking the talk, so sure of his own intellectual superiority. But I knew him. I knew that beneath the slick veneer of corporate success was a man who had never truly built anything with his own hands, who had never truly created something from nothing. He had simply taken what was given to him and called it his own. I took the key out of the box, its brass cool against my fingertips. This, I said, holding it aloft, is the key to more than just a dusty room filled with old tools. It's the key to a legacy that you, Mark, decided was worthless. I placed the box and the key on the table, right next to the envelope I had given him, the one with the stock certificates he still hadn't bothered to open. The juxtaposition was perfect, his potential inheritance lying untouched beside the key to a legacy he dismissed. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. He had been so quick to judge my life, to call it unachieving, without understanding that everything he had, every opportunity he had ever been given, was a direct result of that very life. He saw the end product, the polished result, but not the long, hard road we had traveled to get there. The evening was already a train wreck, and I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity that this wasn't just a miscommunication. It was a profound, chasm-like difference in values. I was trying to give them a piece of my soul, of Jim's soul, and all they saw was a potential asset, a thing to be measured in dollars and cents. The betrayal wasn't just in their words, but in the complete and utter void of understanding between us. My son had not only rejected my gift, he had rejected my life. He had rejected the very things that had made me who I was. And in that moment, the cold, crystalline fury I had felt earlier began to burn. It was the kind of fury that doesn't just flare and die, but settles deep in your bones and changes you forever. I looked at the beautiful table setting, at the untouched pie, and I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. This was a reckoning. What they had done was unforgivable. And what I was about to do, well, they were about to find out exactly what an unachieving woman can do. I promise you, what happens next is a game changer. A woman who was just called worthless is about to show them the true meaning of power. The documents, the key, the untold secrets, everything is about to come together in a shocking twist. You won't want to miss a single second. Stay tuned to find out what happens when a mother's heart breaks and her resolve hardens. What is she about to give them? The truth is so much more than they could ever imagine.
The dinner table, once a symbol of family and togetherness, had become a battleground. The apple pie, my masterpiece of love and labor, sat untouched, a silent witness to the ugliness that had soured our evening. Mark and Lisa, with their faces a mix of confusion and mounting impatience, were staring at me, a silent demand in their eyes for me to get on with it. They were still caught in their little world of transactions, unable to comprehend the gravity of what was happening. They expected a financial gift, a key to a new car, or maybe a surprise check. What they were about to get was a cold dose of reality. I took a deep breath, the air still thick with the scent of their callous words, and went to the study. The room was Jim's sanctuary, a place filled with the rich smell of old books and oiled mahogany. Everything was exactly as he had left it, from the leather-bound journals on his desk to the meticulously organized blueprints on the wall. I walked to the far corner of the room, to a large, industrial-looking cabinet that Jim had custom-built.
He had always said it contained the real guts of his life's work, a testament to his methodical nature. I turned the key I had just shown them, and the heavy metal doors creaked open with a deep groaning sound. Inside, it was not the clutter they might have expected. Everything was labeled, organized, and archived with a precision that was pure Jim. "You see," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence, "your father never considered his work a tiny business. He considered it an empire in miniature, and he built it not on stock options or public praise, but on principles, on trust, on loyalty." I pulled out a series of large, thick binders, each one with a simple title: real estate holdings, investments, intellectual property. I laid them out on the massive oak table, and the thud of each binder landing was a punctuation mark in my quiet monologue. Mark and Lisa's eyes widened with each binder. They had always assumed Jim's company was a small-time operation, a comfortable little nest egg, but nothing more. They were seeing a part of their own family history they had never cared to look at, a history they had been so quick to dismiss. "This," I said, pointing to the first binder, "is the complete portfolio of Jim's real estate." The workshop wasn't just a workshop, Mark. It was the central hub for the properties he bought, fixed up, and rented out. He believed in tangible assets, in things you could touch. He bought up small town properties, family-owned businesses that were struggling, and helped them get back on their feet. He wasn't a ruthless CEO. He was a caretaker, a foundation builder. I watched as Mark's mouth opened slightly, a look of dawning horror on his face. He was seeing not just a collection of buildings, but a long, meticulously crafted network of investments that had been built with a kind of foresight he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "And this," I continued, moving to the next binder, "are the investments. This isn't just a brokerage account, Mark. These are the partnerships Jim built with small-time entrepreneurs, with inventors who had a great idea but no capital. He didn't chase after the next big fad. He invested in people. He was a silent partner in dozens of ventures, from a little coffee shop on the corner to a patent for a new kind of irrigation system. He was a pillar of the community, the man everyone went to for advice and support. But you wouldn't know that, because you were too busy looking for your name in Forbes." Lisa, for the first time all evening, spoke with a genuine, unadulterated tone of awe. "Mary, is this all real?" "Every last bit of it," I said, my voice as hard and unyielding as granite. "And there's one last thing." I reached into the cabinet again and pulled out a single, thin file. It had only one word on the cover in Jim's neat, steady handwriting: "Legacy." I laid it on top of the other binders, and it seemed to dwarf them all. Mark and Lisa looked at the file, then at each other, their faces a pale imitation of the arrogance they had worn just an hour ago. The silence was deafening. The sweet scent of my pie was a distant memory. The only smell now was the cold, sterile smell of paper and ink, the smell of a life's work they had dismissed with a wave of a hand. What they didn't know is what was in that last file would change their lives forever. Everything they had, everything they thought they owned, was about to be put into question. You see, an old woman's unachieved life had been meticulously built to protect her. But what happens when she decides to use that power, not for herself, but to teach a lesson? You won't want to miss the next chapter when the real purpose of these documents is finally revealed. They're about to get the greatest gift of their lives, and they have no idea what it is. The truth is something that will leave them utterly speechless. The silence in the study was a living, breathing thing. It pulsed with the weight of my son's and his wife's stunned disbelief. The sweet scent of my pie was a distant memory, replaced by the sterile, cold aroma of old paper and dust. The sight of the binders, a lifetime of work and quiet achievement, had stripped them of their condescending arrogance. They stood there, two monuments to superficiality, staring at the evidence of a life they had dismissed as unachieving. Their faces, a moment ago so full of smug self-satisfaction, were now a blank slate of shock. They were seeing not just documents, but a vast, sprawling empire that had been built with a quiet purpose, an empire they had always taken for granted. "What is all this, Mom?" Mark finally managed to stammer, his voice a pale imitation of his usual confident tone. I thought Dad's business was small. A few clients? A little consulting?" "That's what he wanted you to think," I said, my voice as steady as the oak desk before me. "He never flaunted his success. He believed that true wealth was a quiet thing, something to be shared, not displayed. He bought up struggling properties, not because he was a real estate mogul, but because he wanted to keep a piece of this town alive. He invested in people, not because he was looking for a return on investment, but because he believed in their dreams." I gestured to the binders. "These aren't just assets, Mark. They're a legacy of kindness, of trust, of a life lived with purpose." Lisa, ever the pragmatist, saw only the numbers. Her eyes were wide with a hunger I had never seen before. But the value, this must be worth millions. Why did you never tell us?" "Because you never asked," I said, my words like shards of glass. "You were too busy looking at the reflection in your own little pond to see the vast ocean that was right beneath you. You never saw Jim. You never saw me. You saw the free passes, the quick dinners, the easy money. You saw the retirement fund you were so eager to get your hands on, but you never once asked how it was built. You just assumed it was always there, a given, a right." I walked over to the last file, the one marked Legacy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I picked it up. This was it, the culmination of everything, the moment of truth. "You said I had achieved nothing," I said, looking Mark directly in the eye. "You said I was just a woman who just lived. But I didn't just live, Mark. I built a life. I built a family. I built a home. And everything you have, everything you think you have, is a direct result of that life. The company you work for, the job you have, the house you live in, all of it came from Jim's connections, from the very people he invested in." I paused for a moment, letting the full weight of my words sink in. Their faces were a study of utter devastation. The silence that followed was so thick, I could almost feel it, a physical presence in the room. "Now, there's a reason I'm showing you this," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "And it's not because I want your gratitude. It's because there's something you need to understand about this legacy you so casually dismissed." I opened the final file. Inside, there were no new stock certificates or deeds. Instead, there was a single legal document, a trust. The trust was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering, something Jim had set up years ago, a silent, powerful guardian of his estate. It detailed every property, every investment, every single partnership. But there was a clause, a single devastating clause that I had helped him write, a clause that stated that if any heir ever showed a profound and willful disregard for the values the estate was built on, if they ever disrespected the legacy it represented, the entire estate, all of it, would be transferred to a charitable foundation to be used to support the very kind of small businesses and struggling families Jim had always helped. I watched as Mark and Lisa read the document. I saw the color drain from their faces as they reached the final paragraph. I watched as their eyes widen in a horrified realization as they understood the full, devastating meaning of what I was holding. It wasn't just a trust. It was a loaded gun pointed directly at their carefully constructed lives. What happens now? What happens when you realize the person you called unachieving holds the keys to your entire future? The climax is here, and the fallout is about to be spectacular. You're on the edge of your seat, and you won't want to miss a single shocking detail. Don't go anywhere. The silence was broken only by the ragged breaths of my son and his wife. The trust document, a testament to Jim's values, was trembling in Mark's hands. He and Lisa were staring at it, their faces a roadmap of their dawning horror. They had spent their entire lives treating my husband's legacy as a bottomless piggy bank, and in a single, devastating moment, they realized that they were facing a moral tribunal. The paper wasn't just a legal document, it was a mirror reflecting their own emptiness. The sweet, innocent smell of my apple pie seemed a million miles away, replaced by the bitter, metallic taste of their own greed. "Mom," Mark's voice was a barely audible whisper. "This can't be real. You would really give it all away?" He looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw a flicker of the little boy he used to be, the boy who would run to me with his scraped knees and scraped feelings. But the years of selfishness had hardened him, and the moment passed. "I didn't give it all away," I said, my voice steady, my hands folded calmly over the table. "I merely showed you what your father and I built, a legacy of compassion, a legacy of respect, a legacy that you, Mark, and you, Lisa, decided was nothing. And according to this document, you are correct. It is nothing. To you. The moment you chose to belittle the values it was built on, you chose to make it nothing. For you." Lisa, her usual composure completely shattered, reached for the document. "This is a joke, Mary. You can't just throw away a lifetime of work because of a few words." I looked at her, and the irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. You're right," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "I can't. But Jim and I could, and we did, years ago. We made sure that what we built would go to those who understood its true value should our own family prove to be undeserving." Mark's face was a mask of utter despair. He looked at the envelope I had given him earlier, the one with the stock certificates. He hadn't even opened it. The gesture I had made, the act of a loving mother, had been met with such contempt that he hadn't even bothered to see what was inside. It was a perfect, crushing metaphor for our entire relationship. He had been so sure that what he wanted was the only thing that mattered, that he hadn't even considered that I had already given him everything. I stood up, walked over to the envelope and picked it up. Mark flinched, as if he expected me to tear it up right there, but I didn't. I looked at the certificate, a simple piece of paper that represented years of work, of sacrifice, of a life lived with purpose. And I looked at my son, a man who had everything but who had managed to achieve nothing of true value. "I said you were unachieving," I said, my voice filled with a quiet finality. "But Jim and I built a home. We built a company. We built a family. And we built a life that you could have been a part of. But you chose not to. So now you get to live the life you've so desperately wanted. The life of a person who has to build everything themselves, without a safety net, without a leg up, without a penny of what you thought was coming." I took a pen out of my pocket, signed my name on the trust document, and looked Mark directly in the eye. I said, "This trust is irrevocable. As of this moment, everything is out of my hands. It's now in the hands of the foundation. They will be in touch with you to facilitate the transfer of all assets. Your company car, the house you live in, the vacation home, all of it. They'll be gone by morning." I placed the signed document back on the table, a final, unchangeable act. I looked at their stunned faces, at the realization that had finally dawned on them, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed my life. I had lost a family, but I had honored a legacy. I had lost a future, but I had gained my own peace of mind. As I walked out of the room, the scent of apple pie was a distant memory, but the taste of justice, that was something I would savor for a long, long time. They called me unachieving. I had just given them everything they owned.